Ian Gillan, the voice that once lifted Deep Purple to the top of the world, yet that very scream also pushed him to the edge of collapse. Behind Child in Time and Smoke on the Water lies the life of a man constantly battling himself. A childhood shattered by his parents' divorce, dropping out of school because of Elvis, scraping by in unknown local bands, then suddenly becoming a hard rock icon overnight. But just when the world praised his every high note, Gillan walked away from Deep Purple at the height of their power, worn down by simmering conflicts and unbearable pressure, only to fall straight into a downward spiral. Financial ruin, alcohol becoming a fragile lifeline, and loneliness following him through every comeback tour. Each reunion only deepened the wounds, reigniting battles that once tore Deep Purple apart, leaving Gillan with an emptiness that grew larger every year. And when he finally seemed to be standing strong again, a devastating personal tragedy struck. A blow so painful that even music couldn't save him. Now, near 80, he still stands before thousands of fans, not for fame, but because music is the only thing left keeping him alive. What makes a man who has tasted both the highest glory and the deepest despair keep screaming into the world? Let us search for the answer through the story of Ian Gillan, a blazing talent with a tragedy that never truly went silent. But to understand why Ian Gillan always had to run from the spotlight even when he stood at the peak of glory, we have to return to the very beginning, where the first scream of his life echoed not on a rock stage, but inside a home breaking apart. Gillan was born on August 19th, 1945, just as Britain stepped out of war. The streets still smelled of smoke and rubble, and in every household, emotional wounds hadn't yet healed. His parents were no exception. His father had left school at 13 to make a living, while his mother grew up in a family with deep musical roots. But that clash between the practical and the romantic tore their marriage apart. When Gillan's mother discovered his father's infidelity during his military service, everything collapsed. He was far too young to understand, yet old enough to feel the silent storms raging through the house, tense dinners, the forced smiles, and his mother's eyes constantly trying to hide disappointment. The family moved from place to place, not to find something better, but as if running from something that could never be fixed. That sense of insecurity became a permanent thread in Gillan's character. Always needing to escape, always feeling that no place was safe enough to stay. In that cramped world, Gillan clung to two comforts: his mother's music and the rebellious universe of comic books. He loved the characters who dared, rule breakers who challenged every limit, and whether by coincidence or destiny, that was the man he would become. An artist who refused to stay inside any box. But it was music that made him feel heard. Listening to his mother at the piano, he learned that emotions too heavy to speak could still explode through the keys. A need began to grow inside him, to unleash his own voice, whatever it would take. Then Elvis Presley appeared on the cinema screen. One movie changed everything for the 16-year-old. Gillan walked out of the theater and realized, I can't sit in a classroom anymore. He dropped out of Hounslow College shortly afterward. No plan, no safety net. Only instinct telling him he had to escape that frozen life and chase something far more ferocious. But dreams never arrive as fast as in the movies. Gillan ended up assembling ice machines in a cold Middlesex factory. Day after day, surrounded by clattering metal, a sound so repetitive it became the perfect metaphor for his youth. Frozen, trapped, with even his breath held hostage. Yet it was that very period that taught him the value of freedom, that if he didn't break out now, he would remain stuck there forever, cold, loud, and meaningless. Ian Gillan did not enter an artist's life driven by a hunger for fame, but by a survival instinct, the need to scream. So he threw himself into any musical door that opened. In 1964, he joined G Rocket and the Moonshiners, drumming while trying to roar into the microphone. But after just a few gigs in cramped pubs, Gillan understood that the scream inside him could not be locked behind a drum kit. He dropped the sticks, chose the microphone, chose to face the audience head-on with the fire burning in his chest. He moved on to the Javelins, then Wainwright's Gentlemen, small bands with enough money only for fuel and a few scattered claps from half-empty rooms. No big stage, no press, no one truly listening. Yet those nights of being forgotten only made Gillan crave even more for the moment he could finally explode. In 1965, an opportunity seemed to arrive when he joined Episode 6 alongside his future companion, Roger Glover. They recorded, they were promoted, they were labeled a band with potential. But 9 singles in a row flopped. Episode 6 insisted on clean, sweet, radio-friendly pop, everything opposite to Gillan's wild volcanic instincts. He began to suffocate, feeling as if he was being forced to hide who he really was. It was his first confrontation with the greatest dilemma of his career: compromise to survive, or rebel to be himself. In 1969, Gillan chose the rebellion. He left Episode 6 with nothing in hand, no contract, no waiting band, no money in his pocket. But he knew one thing: if he stayed still, the scream inside him would die before it ever had a chance to be unleashed. And sometimes, when you refuse safety, destiny finds you. On June 16, 1969, Ian Gillan and Roger Glover officially joined Deep Purple, a band seeking transformation from psychedelic colors into something heavier, bolder, and demanding a voice strong enough to tear through every limit. The Mark II lineup was born: Ritchie Blackmore, John Lord, Ian Pace, Roger Glover, and Ian Gillan. 5 men, 5 oversized egos, 5 sharp edges ready to trigger a global hard rock earthquake. Gillan did not yet know this wasn't only a career turning point. This was where his scream would erupt across the world, and where it would be crushed by conflicts no one could foresee. Because the top is never a peaceful place. Joining Deep Purple felt like finding the right battlefield for his voice. In 1970, In Rock exploded like the sound of hard rock being born, a rebellion carved into audio. Child in Time rose like a warning from Cold War shadows. Nuclear war didn't just threaten humanity, it was already corroding our souls. When Gillan pushed those high notes to the brink of tearing his vocal cords, the world fell silent. People realized, when pain runs deep enough, a voice can become the cry of an entire generation. Gillan wasn't just singing. He was ripping out the fear and rage of youth and hurling it straight into the light. A year later, Fireball launched them even higher. Europe and America welcomed Deep Purple as the new gods of rock. But gods do not live in harmony. Behind the curtain, 2 brightest forces began to clash. Gillan, instinctive, emotional, singing with a bleeding heart. Blackmore, a cold genius, demanding mathematical precision. One needed freedom to burn. One needed control to exist. The brighter the lights, the darker the shadow between them, a crack slowly splitting the heart of the band. Then came 1972. Machine Head arrived and the rock world shook, a seismic album paving the way for speed and power. Highway Star roared like a jet engine. Lazy was a mad chase between Hammond organ and Stratocaster. And Smoke on the Water, a survivor's account of almost dying in Montreux's flames, became eternal. Gillan didn't need to scream here. His voice was steel, coal-hard, cold as someone who had just looked death in the eye. A song born from fear, became a hymn for the ages. The stages grew larger, the audience multiplied. The decibels surged until Guinness named Deep Purple the loudest band in the world. But within that thunder, one man was quietly falling apart. Gillan. Tour after tour, success after success. Whiskey replaced water, throat pain replaced laughter, and every night he screamed as if silence meant instant extinction. Every song was a battle. Every look at Blackmore reminded him of a cage. Don't step out of line. And when Blackmore looked back, he saw a ticking emotional bomb. By 1973, Who Do We Think We Are was released. On the surface, a commercial win, but in truth, the work of people who no longer believed in each other. Gillan was exhausted, lost inside applause that no longer sounded real. One night, alcohol warming his throat but never his heart, he sat down and wrote his resignation letter. Not because they were losing, but because success itself had made him lose who he was. And when a man walks away from glory at its brightest, it means something inside has shattered into pieces that can never be put back together again. Leaving Deep Purple did not mean finding peace. Gillan stepped out of the spotlight like a man waking from a beautiful dream, empty and directionless. He invested in a hotel in Oxford, launched the Mantis Motorcycle Company with the ambitious hope of creating something that could run as fast as my music. But business does not favor dreamers. Both ventures collapsed, money vanished, and due to legal disputes with Deep Purple, he received no royalties for nearly a decade from the very albums that once shook the world. The man who had screamed before tens of thousands was now wrestling with bills and shadows in his living room. And yet, music pulled him back to his feet. In 1975, Gillan formed the Ian Gillan Band and dove into the complex universe of jazz fusion. It allowed him to indulge his artistic curiosity, strange structures, shifting rhythms, vocals gliding freely. But audiences weren't ready for a different Gillan. The records didn't sell, the tours didn't ignite, and the media asked, "What on earth is Gillan doing?" He gave no answer. Because sometimes an artist has to get lost to know where they belong. In 1978, Gillan returned to his primal nature, hard rock. His band, simply named Gillan, arrived raw, fierce, and honest as breath itself. Mr. Universe, 1979, and Glory Road, 1980, restored his name in the UK. Fans screamed for him again in small but blistering venues. Gillan realized his true strength wasn't in sophisticated theories, but in turning the chaos in his chest into sound. Then came 1983, the strangest chapter of his life. Gillan joined Black Sabbath, the dark army of heavy metal. They gave him a completely different realm, gloomy, heavy, like metal scraping the soul. Born Again emerged with Trashed, a tale of his near-death drunk driving incident, and Keep It Warm, secretly written for Braun, the woman behind all his madness. It was a rare moment where Gillan let love slip into the roar of demons, and it became one of the most emotional highlights of his career. But no matter how powerful Black Sabbath was, they weren't Gillan's home. He walked away again, still searching for the place his heart belonged to. And destiny led him back to where everything began, where old wounds were still bleeding. Like a circle that never closes, in 1984, Gillan returned to Deep Purple, the legendary Mark II lineup he had left when it shone brightest. Perfect Strangers struck like lightning through the memories of the rock world. This wasn't just a reunion, it was a resurrection. The tour sold out across Europe, the US, and Japan. The lights, the roaring crowds, and the explosive riffs carried Deep Purple back to the summit. And at the center of the storm was Gillan's scream. The sound that once convinced a generation that rock could save the soul. Fans breathed a sigh of relief. The cracks of the past must surely have healed, but it was only fresh paint over a wall still splitting from within. Gillan remained a free flame, living by pure emotion. Blackmore remained the hand clamping down on every note. The very place they created magic was also where freedom and control collided in sparks. In the studio, every Gillan vocal line and every Blackmore riff became a power struggle. On stage, the looks they exchanged were no longer signals of chemistry, but warnings before an eruption. Deep Purple was now a giant ship racing through the night, but its rudder was being yanked in opposite directions, and like every fate that had ever found them, the grander something is, the easier it collapses under its own weight. By 1989, the conflict reached the point of no return. Gillan was exhausted in a war with no victor, only deeper wounds. Under Blackmore's shadow of authority, the band made a cruel decision: fire the man who had given Deep Purple its soul. Joe Lynn Turner was chosen as his replacement, delivering technically perfect, polished music, but missing the pain and rebellion that defined Deep Purple from the beginning. Fans were furious. Headlines screamed, "No Gillan, no Deep Purple." But what hurt Gillan the most wasn't losing a position. It was being forced, for the second time, to leave the place his heart had never left. Yet fate twisted bitterly again. After Gillan's departure, Deep Purple faltered. Albums flopped. Tours failed to sell. And once more, the band turned to the man they had cast out. In 1992, Gillan was called back to record The Battle Rages On, a title like a grim prophecy. The war had never ended. They were no longer the young rebels of in-rock, but the old hatred still burned hot. The recording studio became a battlefield, microphone and guitar again the sharpest weapons, and Gillan somehow still sang as if defending the very soul of Deep Purple. In 1993, the tour promoting the album began, and everything exploded once more. On stage, they still burned like aging gods fighting against time. But backstage, a single glance could spark a war. Ritchie Blackmore, the man who once shaped the band's original spirit. Threw guitars, splashed water at cameras, then walked away mid-tour. This time he left for good. Without Blackmore, many believed Deep Purple had reached its final period. But Ian Gillan refused to let the ship sink. He stood up and took the wheel, steering the band into a new era, no longer living off old glory, no longer under anyone's shadow. Gillan chose to stay. Not because Deep Purple needed him. Ritchie Blackmore left, but Deep Purple did not die. Ian Gillan understood. If they kept clinging to the past, the band would be buried by the very monument they had built. And so he made the most important decision of his career: choose a new direction. Steve Morse arrived, and not as Blackmore's shadow, but as a gust of wind blowing open the future of Deep Purple. Perpendicular, 1996, proved they could still move forward. The music lighter, more inventive, more expansive in structure. Gillan changed too. No longer screaming to the limit, but telling stories through a voice weighted with memories. The high notes of the past became lines heavy with experience. From Abandon, 1998, Bananas, 2003, to Rapture of the Deep, 2005, Deep Purple traveled across Germany, Japan, America, Eastern Europe, and almost every show sold out. The stadiums they once conquered as young men now welcomed them with a different kind of respect. Old fans arriving to relive their youth. New fans coming to witness a legend that still breathed. After each show, Gillan no longer needed to scream to prove anything. He only needed to stand there, and the whole venue knew Deep Purple remained powerful without Blackmore's shadow. Critics doubted them. They're just living off old glory. But the band answered not with words, with music. Abandon carried the breath of transformation, rawer, more modern. Bananas declared they still wanted to have fun with music, refusing to let their legacy become a cage. By Rapture of the Deep, Gillan was singing about aging, with a voice weathered yet warm, like a warrior full of scars, but still smiling with a microphone in hand. Then Now What? 2013. A declaration that Deep Purple never agreed to step out of the game. It went gold in Germany, reached the top 10 in over a dozen countries, and critics hailed it as a stunning creative rebirth. Infinite, 2017, hinted at a farewell, but the tour became even more explosive, as if fans refused to let them go. Whoosh, 2020, was both philosophical and rebellious. An album where calmness became the boldest statement. And Turning to Crime, 2021, a covers album. But each track transformed into Deep Purple's own DNA, nostalgic, yet never outdated. These weren't works clinging to the past. These were the voices of people who had lived long enough to understand the pain of greatness. And when Gillan stood on stage, hair silver, voice growling lower but eyes sharp as steel, the world knew this man was not only the scream of a generation, he was the beating heart of Deep Purple, the one who kept the band's soul alive despite time and the separations that had torn them apart again and again. Outside of rock, Gillan became a quiet hero. From Armenia, where he joined Rock Aid Armenia and Who Cares, to championing the rebuilding of the Gyumri Music School in 2013. He never talked much about charity, but he always saw it through. And when Deep Purple walked on to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame stage in 2016, Gillan stood there, hair white, voice deeper, but fire still in his eyes. The same fire that took him to the world, burned him, and continues burning to hold him here. But along the journey, life took the greatest things away. In 2022, Steve Morse left to care for his seriously ill wife, and then Bron Gillan, the woman who stood by him for more than 40 years, passed away from heart failure. The loss left a void no stage could fill. Instead of staying home with silence, Gillan kept touring. Not because he needed fame, but because silence had become more terrifying than the highest scream he had ever unleashed. But while Deep Purple continued to roar before tens of thousands around the world, Gillan's personal life was built on the smallest and quietest moments. In the late 60s, when he was still just a young singer drifting between obscure bands, Gillan met Bron, a woman who cared nothing for the spotlight, yet had a warm enough gaze to make a weary man believe he still had a place to come home to. For an artist searching for his identity like Gillan, that peace was more precious than any applause. Their love didn't ignite like a typical rock star romance, no convertibles or wild parties. It began with long conversations, farewells at train stations, handwritten letters from distant tours, and nights where Bron sat by the window waiting for his key to turn softly in the lock. When Deep Purple dominated the early 70s, Gillan lived among hard liquor, internal battles, and tours that drained every drop of strength, screaming nightly until fans believed he might collapse on stage. But only Bron saw that behind those screams was a loneliness he had never spoken aloud. In 1984, after many separations and reunions, they married, a ceremony so modest that few even knew it happened. Yet in the chaotic world of rock, that vow sounded like an anchor. If the whole world turns its back on you, I will be the one standing at the door, waiting for you to come home. Gillan was never easy to live with. He was fiery, blunt, and spent years battling heavy alcoholism when his career spiraled. There were days he came home not as the hero from the stage, but as a tired, lost man, red-eyed, breathing whiskey. Bron did not complain, did not rage, did not leave, because she understood. The man who could make the world howl with his voice was also the man who could break apart from a single moment of abandonment. When Gillan was fired from Deep Purple a second time in 1989, the press called it the fall of a legend. But to Braun, it was simply the moment when the person she loved needed her most. And when he returned to lead Deep Purple into a new era, back to world tours and roaring crowds, Braun quietly did something no headline would ever mention. She built them a real home. They had a daughter, Grace Gillan. She inherited the artist's blood, but not the chaos, choosing music gently, singing with Papa Lee Gall on modest stages. She didn't need to become a legend, just herself. Braun had given their daughter what Gillan spent a lifetime searching for: peace. Braun didn't attend events. She didn't do interviews, never played the role of the rock star's wife. But every time Gillan walked through the door, he said the house still felt warm, because Braun was the last person on earth who didn't worship Ian Gillan, the singer, but loved Ian Gillan, the human being. After Braun's death in 2022, Gillan stepped into a chapter no one had ever taught him how to face. Some hoped he would rest, stay in their seaside home in Dorset to reclaim a sense of calm. But how can a house still be home when the person who kept its fire alive is gone? Gillan knew very well, if he stopped moving, grief would devour him. So he kept touring. Not for applause, but to avoid the sound of a door closing with no one waiting behind it. Entering 2024, nearing 80, Ian Gillan still stood before oceans of fans across Europe, America, especially Germany and Japan, where Deep Purple's status had never faded. The media called it a biological miracle, but Gillan simply said, "Music still calls my name." Deep Purple continued to headline major shows in the UK, including the Glasgow Hydro concert in November 2024. A milestone proving the band is alive, not a museum of itself. In 2025, as Gillan turns 80, European outlets report that he and Deep Purple are discussing a new album and some farewell shows that might never truly be farewell. He avoids the words "final show," as if admitting that would mean music no longer has the power to keep him alive. Backstage, Gillan spends his time on small things Braun once loved: tending the garden, listening to cricket on the radio, writing bits of music no one knows the purpose of. In a rare confession, he admitted, "I'm touring more now, because going home sometimes means the opposite. No grand speeches, no public grieving." Gillan lets his voice speak the sorrow he cannot name, and every time the spotlight hits that silver hair, the audience knows they are witnessing something larger than rock. A man trying to keep living with the only thing that still holds him together: music. Ian Gillan's legacy isn't carved into stone monuments. It lives in the vocal cords that have spent over half a century trying to imitate him and still failing. From Bruce Dickinson of Iron Maiden to Tobias Sammet of Avantasia, generations of rockers grew up fueled by his scream in "Child in Time," a sound that even vocal textbooks still debate. Pure genius or a reckless gamble with the body's limits? Gillan didn't just define the sound of hard rock singing. He set the standard for honesty on stage, singing as if silence meant death. For him, every line was a strike against the boundaries life tried to impose. Deep Purple were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2016. A victory that arrived after too much chaos, too many splits, and reunions that never had time to heal. Gillan stood there, not polished like a myth from a history book, but his eyes said everything. This fire never went out, and no one will ever extinguish it. To Armenia, He is the quiet hero who helped rebuild a devastated musical city. To younger generations, he is proof that art doesn't age. Only those who stop believing in it do. His greatest legacy isn't the platinum records, or the Guinness title of the world's loudest band, or the volcanic live shows. His greatest legacy is the right not to compromise with anyone, including his own life. Ian Gillan was never perfect. He dropped out of school, went broke, battled alcohol, repeatedly pushed Deep Purple to the brink of collapse, and made the woman who loved him most endure the darkness with him, only to become the one who lost her. But those cracks created the sound that gave the whole world goosebumps. Every time he hit rock bottom, the fall only made the scream louder, loud enough to bring him back on stage before roaring crowds. Gillan doesn't sing with technique. He sings with the tearing force of a soul refusing to surrender. Now, near 80, he still walks out before a sea of fans and screams as if it's the final time, not for praise, but to prove he is still alive. That's why Ian Gillan became a legend. Not because he is immortal, but because he has spent his whole life fighting the death inside himself with music. Gillan is still there beneath the lights and the roar of tens of thousands, a warrior who refuses to leave the battlefield. What do you think of the journey of a man who has screamed his entire life just to survive? Leave a comment. And if you want to continue exploring the rock souls who never bow down, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.